Putting in progress. Okay, so we are continuing Masechet Beitzah, Daf Bet Amud Bet, near the bottom. We're finally getting to the end of this explanation of our Mishnah. Again, we have the Beitzah Shenodar B'Yom Tov. We said we have four explanations as to what really what the Mishnah is talking about, what the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel is. So we've seen already three of them. Today we'll see the third and the fourth one again, which are very, very similar explanations. But again, just very briefly. So the first was Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said, after a bit of back and forth in the Gemara, Rav Nachman said, we're dealing with a Beitzah, Hamenet Legadel, Tanagolet, Hamenet Legadel Beitzim. And the issue is, it's an egg, it's a chicken which is designated to lay eggs. And the issue is Muktzah. According to Beit Hillel, Muktzah is an issue. According to Beit Shammai, Muktzah is not an issue. And that was the machloket between them. The Gemara rejected that because ultimately we asked the question, if it's an issue of Muktzah, that applies equally both to the Beitzah and to the Tarnagolet, and it should have said Tarnagolet u Beitzata. Why did it not say that? That was the kasha which the Gemara had, and there was no answer to that. Tosfot pointed out that we don't say this in Niflug B'Tarvayu every single place, but over here we say it because it's very easy. It's just an extra word. I could have just said Tarnagolet to Beitzata, and that's it. Didn't say that, so therefore Rav Nachman is rejected for that reason by those who reject him. The second answer we gave was Rabbi. Rabbi said, no, we are dealing with a Tarnagolet Hamenet La'achila. It's a chicken which is designated for slaughter to be eaten. Therefore, there is no issue of muktzah in that sense. But the problem here is hachana de Rabba. And said Rabba, this Mishnah is talking specifically about, begins with a case of a Yom Tov, which is on Motzei Shabbat. Since Yom Tov here is the day after Shabbat, and we say that the egg which was laid on Yom Tov was actually completed in the chicken's body the day before, the previous day, which was Shabbat. Therefore, the Hachana, he learns it out from the Psukim relating to the man, the Yom HaShishi Echinu et Asher Yaviu, that the preparation, we understand, according to Rashi, preparation means designating it not as muktzeh. According to the other Rishon, it may be something a bit more, but that hachana is even b'dei shamayim for Yom Tov has to be done on chol, or for Shabbat has to be done on chol. You cannot prepare from Shabbat to Yom Tov to Shabbat in that sense, and therefore there is a sense of maybe we might call it muktzeh, but the egg is going to be forbidden. Again, the chicken is fine, but the egg is the hachana took place on Shabbat, and therefore on Yom Tov it's going to be asur. Since there is a gzerah that on Yom Tov, which comes after Shabbat, the egg is going to be forbidden. Therefore, there is a which according to Rabbi, that is going to be an isur d'oraita. So therefore, the gzerah is even on an ordinary Yom Tov or an ordinary Shabbat, this egg is going to be muktzah as well as a gzerah because of what would take place on Yom Tov that comes out after Shabbat because of hachana. That was the explanation of Rabbi. Then we get to the third explanation. So we're now near the bottom on Daf Bet Amud Bet, maybe 2 lines from the bottom, where it says, Rav Yosef Amar, Gzera Mishum Perot HaNoshrim. Okay, so here we have a completely different explanation. Explanation number 1 and number 2, to a certain extent, were related to Muktzeh. Here Rav Yosef says no. He says, we have a Gzera of Perot HaNoshrim, meaning fruit which falls from a tree on Shabbat or on Yom Tov. We know that you're not allowed to go up and climb a tree Shabbat on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to detach the fruit from the tree. That would be a malacha of kotzer. And as a result, the Rabbanan made a gzerah that said if the fruit, even if it falls off by itself, you aren't allowed to use it. You aren't allowed to benefit from it on Yom Tov, because then you might go and inadvertently or advertently go and pluck some more fruit off the tree. Rashi here, last Rashi on Bet Amud Bet is Rav Yosef Amar, Tama de Beitzah b'tarnagolet haomeret la'achila. So he says, really, even going back to our Beitzah, we are dealing with a chicken which is designated for to be eaten. Utukimna ukedeukimna Beit Hillel d'asrei mishum perot hanoshrim min ha'ilan b'Shabbat. In other words, it's not muktzeh, but the reason that Beit Hillel say it's forbidden is because of perot hanoshrim, fruit which falls from the tree on Shabbat. V'kasal kadatach. At this point, we assume as follows: Hashtag zerai mishum perot hanoshrim telo nechlinu. Right, we have this gzera of perot hanoshrim that should not be eaten. Danami la perot hanoshrim and ailan damya. This too, this egg is similar. So there was one gzera on perot hanoshrim, and the egg is similar to perot hanoshrim. That in the same way you have a fruit which grows on a tree and it disconnects from the tree. So you have the egg which disconnects, so to speak, which is laid by the chicken, and that is there is a conceptual similarity between that and the fruits, and therefore this is also going to be forbidden. So says the Gemara on the last line. He says, why are perot hanoshrim? Why are those forbidden in the first place? Says Rabbi over the page. Gzera shemaya levi yitlosh. Says midoraita, there's no problem. From the Torah, on a biblical level, there's no prohibition with these fruits. Rather, it's a gzera. It's a gzera d'Rabbanan. Shemaya levi yitlosh. You might go up and you might pluck more fruit from the tree. The yitlosh, says Rashi at the top of Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, da'hava isura de'oraita da'inu kotzer shu av melacha. That is an isur de'oraita because it's kotzer, which is harvesting, which is an av melacha. By the way, one of the things that we see from here, side point, is that if we're dealing with Yom Tov, so on Shabbat, certainly we know that kotzer is going to be forbidden. You might have thought that on Yom Tov, we know that there are certain melachot which are permitted. We know that melachot ochel nefesh, those things which are involved in the preparation of food. Why don't we say that kotzer is a melacha of ochel nefesh? It's part of the food preparation. So everybody's going to agree that kotzer is one, and this is maybe one of the proofs. Kotzer is a melacha which is not permitted on Yom Tov, even though you might have thought ochel nefesh. And again, many different explanations in the Rishonim as to why specifically that is. One of the understandings is there are melachot of ochel nefesh which are done in the field, and there are melachot of ochel nefesh which are done in the house. Those are much more, and what's the distinction between them? It might be in terms of how difficult they are, how much time they take, how much effort. It might be in terms of what can be prepared before Yom Tov or not before Yom Tov. We'll get into it later in the Masechet, but it's interesting to note that kotzer, according to everybody, is a melacha that is done in the field. That is a melacha, even though it's part of the food preparation, that is not one of the leniencies of ochel nefesh, and that would not be permitted on Yom Tov. So in any event, we say, but if it's a gzera, shemaya levi yitlosh, so says the Gemara, he gufa gzera, v'ana nekum v'nigzol gzera l'gzera. So already perot hanoshrim is itself a gzera. And now you're going to go and you're going to add an extra gzera, a gzera to gzera. We don't normally do that. So answers the Gemara, no. It says, kula chad gzerai. It says, all of it is part of the original gzera. In other words, if we were to say, there's a gzera of perot hanoshrim, so in order that Rabbanan said, don't eat perot hanoshrim, in order that you don't go and pluck more fruit from the tree. And then they said, this Beitzah is going to be forbidden. Why? Because if you eat the Beitzah, then you might eat the perot hanoshrim, and then you might go and pluck the fruit from the tree. That would be a gzera l'gzera. But that's not what we're saying. We're saying, Chazal said, we don't want you to go and take the fruit from the tree. Therefore, anything that is, fruit which detaches from the tree by itself, and anything similar to it is included in the gzera. So don't eat the egg, because if you eat the egg, you might come to think you can go and pluck the fruit from the tree. That's only one gzera, not gzera l'gzera. That's what Rashi says, yeah? He says, chada gzerai, lo sheteizo gzera, dulo leiti lidei perot hanoshrim. We're not saying that there's an additional gzera so that you won't come to eat perot hanoshrim, and therefore you won't come to take the fruit off the tree. Rather, when they established the gzera of perot hanoshrim, af beitzah ita b'mashma, the egg was also included as part of that. Even though there's no way you go and pluck the egg, so to speak, it's also included in the gzera. This is also similar to a pre-nosher. Okay. So that is the opinion of Rav Yosef. That was answer number 3. Now we have Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says differently. He says, why is the egg forbidden in the Mishnah? Rabbi Yitzchak amar gzera mishum mashkin shezavu. Okay, so this is going to be somewhat similar logic to Rav Yosef. Rabbi Yitzchak says we have another gzera of mashkin shezavu, of liquids which came out of the fruits by themselves. Generally speaking, again, you have fruit. You're not allowed to, certainly on Shabbat, you are not allowed to squeeze the fruit to get out the juice. That is going to be the melacha of schita, which is a tolada of dash, of separating that. So therefore, if the liquid comes out by itself, it oozes out by itself, then also, Chazal said you cannot drink that. Why? Because then we're worried that you're going to come and you're going to squeeze the fruit to get juice out of. Again, without getting into all the technicalities of Sechita and Shabbat, but we know an exception would be if, for example, one is squeezing the fruit, depending what kind of fruit it is as well. But if you're very common practical application of this comes up by lemons. So if you're squeezing a lemon to get the juice and you're squeezing it in order to drink the juice, that would be forbidden because you're separating the liquid from the food. That is schita, that's going to be dash. If you're squeezing the lemon directly onto your salad, so it's actually the juice is not juice by itself, but it's part of the food. You're separating the food onto food. That would be permissible, but that's a different that's a different form of that. But in any event, so mashkin shazavu over here says Rabbi Yitzchak that in a similar way to the fruit that comes out of the juice, so to the egg that comes out of the chicken, it's the same idea. You see on Rashi. Rashi says mishum mashkin shazavu. He says the kaim malan asulin bo bayom. They're going to those juices are going to be forbidden on the day, on Shabbat, on Yom Tov itself. Kiditnan ve'im yatzu me'atzman asulin. This is a Mishnah which we have in Masechet Shabbat that talks about schita. It says if the juice came out by themselves, that is forbidden. Beitzah nami dam yalo. The egg is also similar. Shezava v'yotzet makom sheita blua. That it also comes out from the place where it was concealed, where it was kept. And therefore, that's going to be the reason is part of this gezerah. So again, we have the same question. Rabbi Yitzchak amar gezerah mishum mashkin shezavu. On the fourth line, amar le Abaye. Once again, Abaye asks the question. He says, mashkin shezavu tamamai. What is the reason why mashkin shezavu, the juice which oozed out by itself from the fruit, why is that forbidden in the first place? Gezerah shema yischot. It's a gezerah that you might come to squeeze the fruit. Higufa gzera, that in itself is a gzera, is an isur d'Rabbanan. So ananeko v'nigzol gzera l'gzera, are we going to now come and add on another gzera? Exactly the same question that we had before. Answer, and it's the same answer. Kula chada gzera. It's all part and parcel of the original gzera. So again, Rashi says Shema yischot. Says chitat perot tolada de dashi. Right, the squeezing fruits, that is a tolada of the malacha of dash, of threshing. Shemfakan mitoch zag shelahen. You remove it from its original case, so to speak. Kimfalek tva mikashela. It's the same as when you thresh the wheat. Chada gzerai kida belishit. He says when we say it's one gzera, it's just as we explained above. Kshegazua mashkin shazavu. When they came along and made the original gzera of mashkin shazavu, they included within that also a beitzah, also a beitzah. So we see certainly according to Rav Yitzchak and Rav Yosef, the reason that this egg is going to be forbidden in the Mishnah, that is an isur d'Rabbanan. It's part of the gzera, either the gzera of mashkin shazavu or the gzera of perot shenashul. Okay, so we've seen 4 explanations. Whenever we have more than one explanation for any question, it's a sign that there's something wrong with one of the other answers. That's why we need extra ones. So now the Gemara wants to know, why did the Amoraim give 4 different explanations of the Mishnah? Why didn't they all explain in the same way? What's the problem? So says the Gemara like this, says, Kulu karav Nachman lo amri. All of them meaning Rabbi, Rav Yosef, and Rav Yitzchak, they don't give the explanation of the Mishnah of Rav Nachman. Right? Kulu karav Nachman lo amri ki kushia, because of akasha. Right? That's easy. The Gemara said it itself. The Gemara said when it came to Rav Nachman, it said, why don't we say in the Mishnah, why don't we include both the Beitzah and the Tarnagolet? That was the kushya. Apparently, that kushya was strong enough that all the other Amoraim did not agree with Rav Nachman's explanation of the Mishnah. So Rav Nachman lo amri ki kushya. Kerabba nami lo amri. So why do Rav Nachman, along with Rav Yosef and Rav Yitzchak, not hold like Rabba? Answer hachana leitlu. This principle of hachana l'Rabba, that is Rabba's chidush, but the others do not hold it. They disagree. They hold that is not required. Ela. So in other words, the Gemara says we understand why Rav Nachman is rejected. We can understand why Rabba is rejected. But why Rav Yosef and Rav Yitzchak both said very, very similar answers. Why did they have to say differently? Why couldn't they say the same thing? And Rav Yosef, Rabbi Yitzchak. Why did Rav Yosef come and say it's a perot noshrim, and Rabbi Yitzchak said it's mashkin shezavo? Okay, everybody agrees it's a gzeira. Why does it have to be different? So Amar Lacha, Beitzah uchla, uperot uchla, lapuke mashkin delav uchla. So Rav Yosef is the one who says that the Beitzah is asura because it's the gzeira of perot noshrim. Will say the following reason. He says, "Amalacha Beitzah uchla, an egg is food, uperot uchla, and fruit, like these fruits which fall off the tree, are food. Lapuke mashkin delav uchla." You brought me the example, Rabbi Yitzchak, of mashkin, of liquids. So liquids are not food. I think it's more comparable. The analogy is better between two different types of food rather than between food and drink. Delav uchla. Okay, that's Rabbi Yosef. What about Rabbi Yitzchak? Rabbi Yitzchak might amalo amak Rabbi Yosef. So why didn't Rabbi Yitzchak also say that it's the case of perot noshrim? Why did he say something else? So might amalo amak Rabbi Yosef. Amar Lacha, he says no. When you look at the analogy, the Beitzah has something in common more with the mashkin shezavu more than with the fruit. He says Beitzah blua. He says an egg is, I suppose, concealed. It's hidden, right? It's inside the chicken. Umashkim blew in. And the liquids, the juices, are also concealed inside the fruit. Lapuke perot de magalu v'kaimu. That is not similar to the fruits which are hanging on the tree, but they are there, they're open, they're exposed, and that is going to be something different. Okay, so the question is where you find the similarity, where you think it would have been most appropriate for Chazal to include the Beitzah as part of the Gzerah. That's machloka between Rav Yosef and Rav Yitzchak. So those are the four explanations of the Mishnah. Now, it says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan, and it's going to prove it in a bit of a roundabout way. But it says Af Rabbi Yochanan Savar Gzerah Mishum Mashkin Shezav. Rabbi Yochanan also holds that our Mishnah is a case of the reason the Beitzah is forbidden according to Beit Hillel is because of this gzera of mashkin shezavu, of the juices that come out of the fruits. How do we know that Rabbi Yochanan holds that way? We're going to see a stira. There's a stira which Rabbi Yochanan holds in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda between two different Mishnayot, and we're going to infer from the stira that it must be that Rabbi Yochanan learns our Mishnah the way that Rabbi Yitzchak learned. Okay, so first let's see what the stira is, and then we'll come back and see how it's related. So, Af Rabbi Yochanan Savar Gzera Mishum Mashkin Shezav, as follows. Halfway down the Amud. Rabbi Yochanan Rami the Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan pointed out a contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda in two different Mishnayot. Umeshani, and he answered it. He not only pointed out the contradiction, he also gave a resolution as follows. Tanan, en sochtin et haperot lotzi men mashkin, v'im yatzu me'atzman asurin. Rabbi Yehuda omer, im lochlin, hayotze me'en mutar, v'im lemashkin, hayotze me'en asur. Okay, so first of all, we have a Mishnah again in Masechet Shabbat, going back to this topic of schita, and the Mishnah says as follows. There's a few different machlokot here, so let's try and follow. First of all, the Mishnah says like this: Tanakama, en sochtin et haperot lotzi me'en mashkin. It is forbidden to squeeze fruit on Shabbat in order to extract from them the juice. V'im yatzu me'atzman asurin. Okay, so you can't squeeze them, and if they came out, the juice came out itself, that is going to be forbidden. That's exactly what we've just seen. That is the gzera of mashkin shezavu. That is the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda says, not so simple. He says, Im lo'ochlin hayotze men mutar, ve'im l'mashkin hayotze men asur. So Rabbi Yehuda argues regarding the last din of Tanakama. Everybody agrees that ein sochtin et haperot, that you cannot squeeze the fruits. The question is, if you have mashkin shezavu, if you have the juice that comes out by itself, Tanakama said it's asur. Rabbi Yehuda says, not so simple. Let's ask ourselves a question. It says, what is the purpose of these fruits? What are they being used for? Im lo'ochlin hayotze men mutar, ve'im l'mashkin hayotze men asur. If these are fruits which are designated to be eaten, right, then juice which comes out of them is going to be, that comes out by itself, is going to be allowed. If there are fruits which are, you have them there, that they're going to be used to be squeezed to make juice, then what comes out of them is asur. What's the distinction? So it makes a lot of sense. If we say the gzeira of mashkin shezavu is that the juice that comes out by itself you cannot consume because we're worried that you might come and squeeze the fruit to get the juice out. So Rabbi Yehuda is saying we don't have to go so far with that. If it's fruits that you would squeeze, so yes, you can't have the juice. But if it's fruit that you're intending to eat, if it's fruit you wouldn't squeeze out to get the juice anyway, so then there's no need for the gzera because you're not going to get the juice out of it if the juice comes out by itself. So the argument between Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda revolves around the specific case of you have fruits which are intended to be used as food, and the juice comes out by itself. According to Tanakama, that's still included in the gzera of mashkin shezavu. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not, and that would be permitted. Okay, that is Mishnah number 1. So what do we infer from that? What do we infer from what Rabbi Yehuda is saying? It says, Alma kol ochlin leRabbi Yehuda uchla de'ifratu. He says we can infer that according to Rabbi Yehuda, if I have food, any food that emerges from that is also considered food. That's what we saw on the first Amud, this concept of uchla de'ifrat. He's saying you have the fruit which is being used for food, and the juice comes out, but that's also food separated from food, and that is going to be permissible. That is Mishnah number 1. Now, V'raminu. So says Rabbi Yochanan, here's the contradiction. We have another Mishnah. Ve'od amar Rabbi Yehuda, matneh adam al kalkala sheperot b'yom tov rishon v'ochla b'sheni v'chein beitzah shnoda b'rishon te'acher b'sheni. And then the inference is b'sheni in b'rishon lo. So that is a Mishnah that's in Masechet Eruvin. Over here, it's talking about, the context is that we have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. There's machloket in the Gemara, whether the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah are considered Kedusha Achat or Shtei Kedushot. Do we consider it as one long Yom Tov, or do we say, by Yom Tov, we're going to get into this shortly in the upcoming Dapim as well. When it comes to Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot, everybody agrees that they are two separate days. Right? Why do we have Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot? Because we're concerned that we didn't know when Rosh Chodesh actually fell. So it might be a day later. But what comes out of that is we then say Mima Nafshach. We say if the first day was really meant to be Yom Tov, so certainly the second day is Chol. And if the second day was meant to be Yom Tov, then the first day was Chol. We treat them both as Yom Tov, but for these dinim of Beitzah, etc., if one is inherently Chol, that's going to make a difference. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan is talking about here. Here he's talking about this is the case on Rosh Hashanah. And what's the case? So you have a basket of fruit. You have a basket of fruit which is tevel. And what happens is a person forgot to separate Trumot and Masrot. Again, this isn't so common for us because normally if you buy a basket of fruit from the fruit store or from the supermarket or from the shuk or wherever it is, so Trumot and Masrot have already been taken. But if you're taking it directly from the farm, so you need to separate your Trumot and Masrot. You forgot to. And this is not something you can do on Yom Tov or Shabbat. Chachamim said you cannot separate Trumot and Masrot on Yom Tov and Shabbat. That is because that is a correcting, that is fixing the food to be eaten, that is similar to matak and kli, and that would be forbidden. So our case here is like this. You have this basket of fruit on Yom Tov. Rosh Hashanah, it's Yom Tov. You forgot to take, it's Tevel. You forgot to take Trumot and Masrot before Yom Tov. But he says Rabbi Yehuda, you can make the following condition. You can make it conditional, but Yom Tov Rishon v'ochla b'sheni. You can make a t'nai on Yom Tov Rishon you can then eat it on Yom Tov Sheni. So how would this work? Says Rashi. Matnei adam ala kalkala. Laha milta have shtei kedushot. So this is according to the opinion that the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah are like the 2 days of Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galiot. They are two separate days. In other words, one of them is Yom Tov and one of them is Chol. Inherently, again, practically we treat them both as Yom Tov, but inherently only one of them actually is. So you have a basket of fruit which is tevel, shachach, v'lo yiseh me'erev Yom Tov. You did not separate Trumot and Masrot on Erev Yom Tov. Utnanen magbin Trumot and Masrot b'Yom Tov. And we know you cannot separate Trumot and Masrot on Yom Tov. So what do? He says, Me'aseh b'Yom Tov b'tnai. You separate on Yom Tov with the following tnai, following condition. V'omer, im hayom chol u'lamachar kodesh. This is the first day of Yom Tov. So you say, if today is inherently meant to be chol, and tomorrow is actually Yom Tov, well, then there's no problem. Then you elu trumal masrot al elu. Then I'm separating the trumot and masrot today, because today is inherently chol, and that's fine. The ima yom kodesh en b'dvarai klum. If today is actually Yom Tov, well, then I can't do anything. V'naten bahem siman, and he marks off where. And then lemacharat, the next day, chozer v'omer ken. The next day he makes that night once again. He says, Ima Yom Chol ve'etmol Kodesh. He says on the second day, if today is really Chol and yesterday was Kodesh, so then you elu Trumot al then now I'm separating the Trumot and Masrot. V'ima Yom Kodesh ve'etmol Chol. And if the other way around, if yesterday was Chol inherently, so Harei na'aseh Truma me'etmol, and then the Truma was already separated yesterday. Mima nafshach nitkenu. Mima nafshach. Either way, it's going to work, right? If the first day was actually Chol, so then you separated it on the first day. If the second day was actually chol, then you separated it on the second day. Either way, you can eat from these fruits on the second day of Yom Tov. You understand this only works in one direction. This only works for the second day. It can't work on the first day, because if you're going to say if the first day is actually chol, so then that's fine. You can eat it on the first day. But if the first day is actually kodesh and the second day is chol, well, on the first day it's still teva, so you won't be able to eat it. So therefore, that is regarding the Trumot and Masrot, regarding this kalkala of Perot. And then Rabbi Yehuda continues. He says, "V'chein Beitzah shenoda b'rishon te'acher b'sheni." Also, an egg which is laid on the first day of Yom Tov. He says te'acher b'sheni, that can then be consumed on the second day. B'sheni in b'rishon lo. Only on the second day can you eat it, but not on the first day. Now we're going to see, again, there's no explanation here, but Rashi explains like this. So shortly, the Gemara will explain exactly why Rashi has to say like this. But Rashi says, he says, Chen lagabe Beitzah, regarding the egg, he says, Avu shtei kedoshot, right? Two separate kedoshot, these 2 days of Yom Tov. Ha'echad chol va'echad Yom Tov. One is chol and one is Yom Tov. Again, intrinsically, not practically. V'anoda barishon muteret b'sheni. And that which is laid on the first day is going to be permitted on the second day, but not the other way around, right? B'sheni in barishon lo. You can eat it on the second day, not on the first day. Says Rashi. Alma komidi dezav mimkomo b'Yom Tov v'afilu uchla asur. It says anything which comes out of its place on Yom Tov, even to eat it, is going to be forbidden, right? And now here's the stira. I'll just mention quickly what the stira is, and then we'll carry on tomorrow. We'll go over it again. But in the first Mishnah, what Rabbi Yochanan learned, in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, was that any food which is separated, food which separates from food, you can eat it. So even mashkin shezavu, even the liquid, the juice of the food that was separated on Yom Tov, if the fruit is meant to be food, that's still going to be permitted. Why? Because it's food. In the case of the egg, if we say again by the egg that it's that the egg is food, the chicken is food, so therefore you would think that even on the first day of Yom Tov, when that egg is laid, that would be permitted. But Rabbi Yehuda says no. So that is going to be, if we understand that the reasoning, all this, the whole contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda is predicated on the understanding that the reason that the egg would be forbidden in the first place is because of the gzera of mashkin shezavu. And that's going to be the proof of Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, what do we do with the stira and how do we solve that? We'll go over it in a little bit more detail tomorrow. Okay, have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you very much.